The diplomatic shuttle moved through space like a silver needle threading through stars. Inside, Captain Roy Bennett checked his uniform one last time and tried to calm his nerves. This was humanity's first official contact with the Valdori Empire, and everyone back on Earth was watching. The year 2387 had brought many changes to human space. 53 colonies now stretched across dozens of star systems, each one a testament to human determination. But beyond their borders lay something much larger and older. The Valdori Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for 10,000 years, and their crystalline ships were legends among the other species humanity had met. Bennett's communications officer, Lieutenant Kate Miller, looked up from her station with wide eyes. "Captain, you need to see this," she whispered. Through the main viewport, Chrysos Prime hung before them like a giant jewel. The planet's surface sparkled with crystalline cities that reached into the clouds. Massive spires twisted toward the sky, each one glowing with internal light. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "My God," whispered Dr. Paul Harrison, the mission's chief scientist. "The energy readings are off the charts. Those structures aren't just buildings. They're living crystal formations." Bennett nodded grimly. Intelligence reports had mentioned this, but seeing it was different. The Valdori weren't just advanced. They were alien in ways that made humans uncomfortable. Their bodies were made of living crystal. Their thoughts moved through harmonic frequencies, and they lived for thousands of years. The shuttle docked with what seemed to be a greeting station. As soon as the airlock opened, Bennett understood why other species spoke of the Valdori in hushed tones. The chamber beyond was huge, easily the size of a football stadium, and everything was made of the same living crystal that glowed with soft light. 3 Valdori waited for them. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies translucent and angular like walking gemstones. When they moved, Bennett could hear a soft musical tone, as if their very existence was a song. The center figure stepped forward. Its voice came not from a mouth, but from vibrations in the crystal formations around the room. "I am Chancellor Thex Mordain of the Valdori Empire. You are the representatives of the species called humans." "That's correct," Bennett replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm Captain Roy Bennett of the Terran Federation. We come seeking peaceful relations between our peoples." Mordain's crystalline head tilted slightly. The sound he made might have been laughter, but it sounded like breaking glass. "Peaceful relations? How quaint. Tell me, Captain Bennett, how long do your people live?" The question seemed odd, but Bennett answered honestly. "Our average lifespan is about 90 years, though some live longer with medical treatment." The musical tone from Mordain changed, becoming sharper and more discordant. The other 2 Valdori began making similar sounds. Bennett realized they were talking to each other, but in frequencies human ears could barely detect. 90 years, Mordain repeated, and now there was something cold in his harmonic voice. "Mayflies. You are mayflies trying to speak to mountains." Dr. Harrison stepped forward. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand the comparison." "Of course you don't," Mordain replied. "I have lived for over 2,000 years. My assistant here has seen 3,000 summers pass. We have watched stars be born and die while your entire species learned to walk upright. And you come to us speaking of equals?" Bennett felt his jaw tighten. "Age doesn't determine worth, Chancellor. We may be young as a species, but we've accomplished much." "Have you?" Mordain's tone became mocking. "You've spread to a few dozen worlds in less than 4 centuries. We ruled 1,000 systems when your ancestors were still living in caves. You build with metal and plastic while we grow our cities. From living crystal. You fight with crude chemical weapons while we command the very forces that hold atoms together." The truth of it stung, because Bennett knew it was accurate. Human technology was impressive by human standards, but compared to what he'd seen just approaching this planet, they were children playing with toys. Nevertheless, Bennett said carefully, we hoped to establish trade relations and perhaps learn from each other. Learn from each other? Mordane's laughter now sounded like a crystal chandelier falling downstairs. What could mayflies possibly teach mountains? No, Captain Bennett. You misunderstand your place in this galaxy. The Chancellor moved closer, and Bennett could see patterns of light moving through the crystal of his body like thoughts made visible. Your species will serve the Empire, as is proper. You will mine asteroids in the outer systems, maintain equipment too simple for Valdori attention, and breed new workers as needed. In return, we will not exterminate you, Dr. Harrison gasped. You're talking about slavery. We're talking about natural order, Mordane corrected. The long-lived rule, the short-lived. The advanced guide, the primitive. The eternal command, the temporary. This is how civilized space operates. Bennett's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, but he forced himself to remain calm. And if we refuse? Then you will serve as an example to other mayfly species who might develop similar delusions of importance. The captain looked around the chamber and noticed something he'd missed before. Along the walls were display cases, and inside each, one was what looked like the preserved remains of different alien species. Some were obviously sentient, with tool-using appendages and large skulls that suggested intelligence. Those are the species who refused, Mordane explained, following Bennett's gaze. The Harani thought their hive mind made them special. The Gorvash believed their warrior culture made them worthy of respect. The Veliks assumed their technological achievements earned them a place at the table of powers. They were all wrong. Lieutenant Miller's voice came through Bennett's earpiece. Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the station. I think they're powering weapons. Mordane's harmonic voice filled the chamber. You have one day to consider our generous offer, Captain Bennett. Accept your species' proper role or join our museum of failures. That night, confined to guest quarters that felt more like a prison, Bennett's team worked frantically. Dr. Harrison had been monitoring Valdori communications and discovered something horrifying. The Empire didn't just dominate other species. They regularly conducted culling operations to prevent any subject race from becoming too numerous or advanced. They're not just supremacists, Harrison whispered. They're gardeners. They prune the galaxy to keep everything exactly as they want it. Through their window, they could see Valdori moving through the crystal corridors below. Their movements were graceful and unhurried, like beings who had never known urgency or fear. They had ruled for so long that the concept of real opposition was foreign to them. Bennett made his decision. He activated his emergency transmitter, knowing it would likely get them all killed, but also knowing that some messages were worth dying for. The signal would take weeks to reach Earth, but when it did, every human would know what they faced. This is Captain Roy Bennett of the diplomatic vessel Endeavor. First contact with the Valdori Empire has failed. They view humanity as insects, to be crushed or enslaved. They have given us 1 day to surrender our entire species or face extermination. I want Earth to know. We did not bow. We will not serve. And if they kill us for it, make sure they pay for every drop of human blood. As he finished the transmission, alarms began sounding throughout the crystal station. The Valdori had detected. His signal and their response was swift and merciless. But the message was already racing toward human space at the speed of light, carrying with it the spark that would ignite the greatest war the galaxy had ever seen. The last thing Bennett saw before the crystalline guards arrived was a star twinkling. In the distance, so far away it might have been Earth itself, watching over its children in their darkest hour. The news hit Earth like a meteor strike. President Maria Santos sat in the emergency session room deep beneath Geneva, watching the same transmission for the 5th time. Around the long table, the faces of humanity's leaders showed the same mix of rage and determination that she felt burning in her chest. They executed the entire diplomatic team, reported Intelligence Director Robert Kane, his voice tight with controlled anger. Sensors show the Valdori broadcast their deaths to every species in their empire as a warning. They want everyone to know what happens to those who refuse to kneel. Foreign Minister David Park slammed his hand on the table. 57 people, 57 of our best and brightest, murdered because they refused to sell out humanity. Santos looked around the room at the representatives from every human colony and nation. The question before us is simple. Do we negotiate from a position of weakness, or do we show these crystal tyrants what happens when you threaten the human race? The vote was unanimous. War. Within hours, Admiral Tom Fletcher found himself in command of the largest military mobilization in human history. Operation Swarm would be humanity's answer to 10,000 years of Valdori dominance. The name itself was chosen deliberately, inspired by Captain Bennett's final words about being treated like insects. Fletcher stood in the war room on Luna Station, studying the holographic display of known Valdori space. The Empire controlled over 800 star systems, while humanity held 53. By any reasonable measure, it was hopeless. But Fletcher had spent 40 years in the military, and he'd learned that reasonable measures didn't always account for human stubbornness. "Show me what we're working with," he ordered his staff. Colonel Ann Rivera activated the display showing human military assets. "We have 1,200 frontline vessels, ranging from destroyers to battleships. The Valdori intelligence we've gathered suggests they have roughly 300 capital ships, but each one is significantly more advanced than ours." "What about production capacity?" Fletcher asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Rivera replied with the first smile Fletcher had seen all day. "Our shipyards are designed for mass production. We've been building ships fast and cheap for colony expansion. The Valdori build their vessels like works of art. Each one takes them years to complete." Fletcher nodded. He'd studied military history extensively, and this reminded him of certain conflicts from Earth's past. Quality versus quantity had been debated by generals for millennia, and the answer usually came down to who could adapt faster. Dr. Angela Reed arrived at the briefing straight from the Titan research facility, where she'd been analyzing every piece of Valdori technology humanity had managed to acquire through trade with other species. She looked exhausted but excited. "Admiral, I think we've found something," she said, activating a new display. "Valdori shields operate on harmonic frequencies, just like everything else about them. They're incredibly strong against conventional weapons, but they have a specific resonance point that makes them vulnerable." "Vulnerable how?" Fletcher asked. "If we can match the right frequency, we can cause their shields to collapse entirely. The problem is generating that frequency with our current weapons systems." Fletcher studied the data. "What would it take to modify our weapons?" "Time and resources we don't have if we want to match their technological advantage," Reed admitted. "But I have another idea. Instead of making our weapons better, we make more of them. Quantity has a quality all its own." Over the following weeks, human space transformed into the largest military-industrial complex in known history. Every shipyard worked around the clock, producing vessels based on a revolutionary new philosophy. Instead of building ships to last, for decades, humanity would build ships to fight once and win. The new Swarm-class destroyers were marvels of simplified engineering. They carried just enough armor to survive one major engagement, just enough firepower to hurt enemy vessels, and just enough life support to keep their crews alive during a single battle. They could be built in a tenth of the time it took to construct a traditional warship. Fletcher visited the Titan yards to see the first completed swarm destroyer. It wasn't beautiful like the sleek vessels in recruitment posters. It looked exactly like what it was, a weapon built for a single purpose. "She's not pretty," admitted Chief Engineer Bill Murphy, "but she'll do her job. We've got production lines on 30 worlds pumping these out. Give us 6 months and we'll have 1,000 of them ready to fly." "How do they handle in combat?" Fletcher asked. "Like angry hornets," Murphy grinned. Fast, maneuverable, and absolutely vicious in swarms, the Valdori won't know what hit them. Meanwhile, Dr. Reed's teams worked on mass-producing simplified versions of Valdori technology. They couldn't match the crystalline sophistication of the Empire's weapons, but they could create crude copies that would work well enough. "We've cracked their shield frequency," Reed reported during a late-night briefing. "We can't reproduce. They're harmonic weapons, but we can build oscillation bombs that will disrupt their shields if we get close enough." "How close?" Fletcher asked. "Uncomfortably close. The delivery ship probably won't survive the experience." Fletcher nodded grimly. That was exactly the kind of mission parameters he'd expected. This war wouldn't be won by heroes in gleaming ships. It would be won by ordinary people willing to make extraordinary sacrifices. The recruitment campaigns across human space emphasized this reality. The posters didn't show glamorous space battles or heroic captains. They showed simple messages. "They killed our diplomats. Now they want our children. Sign up and make them regret both mistakes." Volunteers flooded recruitment centers on every world. They came from every walk of life: farmers from agricultural colonies, miners from asteroid stations, teachers from university worlds. What they all shared was a burning anger that the Valdori had dared to threaten humanity's future. Captain Lisa. Rodriguez had been a cargo hauler before the war started. Now she commanded a swarm destroyer and led training exercises that would have been considered suicidal under normal circumstances. Her specialty was the WASP formation, a tactical arrangement where dozens of small ships would coordinate strikes on single large targets. "Remember," she told her squadron leaders, "we're not trying to be heroes. We're trying to be effective. The Valdori think like individuals because they live for thousands of years. They can't imagine a species willing to sacrifice the few to save the many. That's going to be their downfall." As the months passed, intelligence reports began filtering in from the Valdori border regions. The Empire was taking notice of human military buildup, but their response was exactly what Fletcher had hoped for: contemptuous dismissal. A intercepted Valdori communication summed up their attitude perfectly. "The Mayflies are building primitive vessels in large numbers. They seem to believe quantity can overcome the natural superiority of Valdori crystal technology. When their pathetic fleet arrives, it will be easily destroyed, providing an educational spectacle for the lesser species." President Santos reviewed the final preparations from her command bunker. 6 months had passed since Captain Bennett's last transmission, and humanity was ready to answer his call. The production numbers were staggering: over 2,000 swarm destroyers, 500 modified cruisers, and countless smaller vessels designed for specific tactical roles. But more important than the ships were the people crewing them. Every captain understood that this wasn't a war for territory or resources. This was a war for the right to exist as a free species. The Valdori had made it clear that humanity would either serve or be exterminated. Admiral Fletcher stood on the bridge of the command ship Vengeance, watching the largest human fleet in history prepare for departure. The name had been chosen by popular vote among the crews, and it reflected their mood perfectly. "All vessels report ready for departure," his communications officer announced. Fletcher thought about Captain Bennett and the 56 other people who had died because they refused to let humanity bow to alien tyranny. Their sacrifice had given humanity time to prepare, and now that preparation would be tested against an empire that had never known defeat. "Signal the fleet," Fletcher commanded. "Operation Swarm is now active. Time to show these crystal bastards what happens when you underestimate the human race." As thousands of human vessels accelerated toward Valdori space, word began spreading through the galaxy. The Mayflies had built themselves an army, and they were coming for revenge. Other enslaved species watched in amazement and hope, wondering if these newcomers might actually accomplish what no one else had managed in 10 millennia. The Valdori Empire was about to learn that some insects bite back. The first battle happened at a place that didn't even have a proper name: Humans called it Kepler Station, after the distant star it orbited, but to the Valdori it was simply Outpost 77 Alpha, a minor monitoring station on the edge of their territory. General Vex Thulan commanded the station's defenses with the casual confidence of someone who had never experienced a real military threat. Thulan's crystalline form hummed with harmonic frequencies as he reviewed the sensor data. 80 primitive human vessels approached his position, their crude metal hulls and chemical propulsion systems an insult to proper engineering. His own force consisted of 12 Valdori battlecruisers, each one a masterpiece of crystal technology that had taken decades to grow. "Shall we move to intercept the Mayfly fleet?" asked his subordinate, Commander Kex Villain. Thulan's laugh resonated through the crystal corridors like wind chimes in a storm. "No need to exert ourselves. Let them come to us. It will be educational for the other species to watch their pathetic vessels shatter against Valdori superiority." What Thulan couldn't see from his sensor readings was the desperate preparation happening aboard the human ships. Captain Lisa Rodriguez had spent the journey to Kepler Station drilling her squadron, in tactics that conventional military wisdom would have called insane. Her flagship, the destroyer, Wasp, led a formation of 37 identical vessels, each one crammed with volunteers who knew they probably wouldn't survive the next few hours. "Remember the briefing," Rodriguez announced over the communication channel. "Their shields are strong, but they have that harmonic weakness Dr. Reed found. We hit them with oscillation bombs at close range, and I mean close range. If you're not close enough to see the expressions on their crystalline faces, you're not close enough." Lieutenant Mike Torres, commanding the destroyer, Hornet, couldn't help but grin despite his nerves. "Captain, I don't think the Valdori have faces." "Then get close enough to see what they have instead," Rodriguez shot back, earning nervous laughter from her squadron. The battle began exactly as Thulan expected. The human vessels approached in what appeared to be a standard attack formation, their crude weapons firing projectiles that splashed harmlessly against Valdori energy shields. Thulan's cruisers responded with devastating crystal lance attacks that cut through human ships like hot knives through paper. In the first few minutes, 12 human destroyers were completely destroyed. Their crews died instantly as Valdori weapons tore through their simplified armor. By conventional standards, it was a massacre. By human standards, it was exactly according to plan. "Phase 2, Rodriguez commanded as her surviving ships scattered into seemingly random patterns around the Valdori force. Thulan watched the human vessels break formation with growing confusion. Their movements made no tactical sense. Some ships were accelerating directly toward his cruisers on obvious suicide runs, while others circled at maximum range, firing ineffectively. "Are they retreating or attacking?" Villan asked, his harmonic voice carrying notes of uncertainty. "Neither," Thulan replied, though he was beginning to feel the first stirrings of something Valdori rarely experienced: doubt. "They appear to be having some sort of breakdown in command structure." That was when the first oscillation bomb detonated against the shields of the cruiser Crystal Harmony. The Valdori shield technology, perfected over millennia, had never encountered a weapon designed specifically to exploit its harmonic resonance. The shield collapsed instantly, leaving the graceful crystal vessel naked to conventional weapons. 3 human destroyers immediately poured fire into the unprotected cruiser. Their primitive kinetic weapons, useless against Valdori shields, proved devastatingly effective against crystal hull structures. The Crystal Harmony shattered like a dropped glass, its crew dying in silent agony as their crystalline bodies cracked and shattered. "Impossible!" Thulan's harmonic scream echoed through every Valdori ship. "Reform defensive positions. All vessels concentrate fire on the nearest human ships." But the humans weren't fighting like any enemy the Valdori had ever faced. Instead of trying to preserve their vessels, they were using them as guided missiles. The destroyer, Yellow Jacket, lost all weapons and most of its crew to a crystal lance strike, but its captain didn't retreat. Instead, he ordered full acceleration toward the nearest Valdori cruiser. The Yellow Jacket struck the Eternal Song at nearly 10% of light speed. Both ships vanished in a burst of nuclear fire that temporarily blinded sensors across the battlefield. When the glare faded, debris from both vessels was spreading across thousands of kilometers of space. "They're ramming us," Villan reported, his harmonic voice now carrying overtones of panic. "The Mayflies are using their ships as weapons." Thulan couldn't believe what he was seeing. In 10,000 years of Valdori military history, no enemy had ever been willing to trade their own lives so freely. Combat was supposed to be an art form, a careful dance between evenly matched opponents who respected each other's skill and technology. This wasn't combat. This was extermination. Captain Rodriguez coordinated the swarm with the cold efficiency of someone who had accepted her own death before the battle started. Her tactical display showed the positions of every human ship, and she orchestrated their movements like a conductor leading a symphony of destruction. "Hornet, take your wing and hit the cruiser on the left flank. Get those oscillation bombs as close as you can." Stinger. "Group, I need you to keep their attention focused forward, while Wasp Group comes in from below." "What about you, Captain?" Torres asked over the communication channel. Rodriguez looked at her tactical display, where the massive Valdori command ship sat in the center of the enemy formation like a crystal cathedral. It was beautiful and deadly, and everything she had. "Train to destroy. I'm taking Wasp Group straight down the middle," she announced. "If we can take out their command ship, the rest will lose coordination." The next few minutes became a masterclass in human tactical thinking. Every Valdori advantage was turned against them. Their superior shields became liabilities when human bombs exploited their harmonic frequencies. Their graceful formations became death traps when human ships ignored conventional tactics and attacked from impossible angles. The Valdori tried to adapt, but their crews had centuries of experience fighting enemies who valued their own lives. They couldn't comprehend opponents who would sacrifice 3 ships to destroy one, or captains who would ram damaged vessels into enemy hulls rather than retreat. Thulan's command ship, the Eternal Dominion, found itself surrounded by a swirling cloud of human destroyers. Each one fired its oscillation bomb at point-blank range before either retreating or ramming. The ancient Valdori shields, which had protected the Empire for millennia, flickered and failed under the coordinated assault. "All stations, abandon." "Ship!" Thulan commanded as human kinetic rounds began tearing through his vessel's crystal hull. But there was nowhere to run. The human ships had surrounded his cruiser like antibodies attacking an infection. The Eternal Dominion broke apart with the sound of a mountain falling, its crystal structure unable to withstand the sustained bombardment. Thulan died as his crystalline body shattered, his harmonic scream adding to the discordant symphony of destruction that filled the battlefield. When the shooting stopped, 8 Valdori cruisers had been completely destroyed. The remaining 4 retreated in disorder, their crews traumatized by combat unlike anything in their military experience. The human fleet had lost 63 destroyers and over 3,000 crew members. By Valdori standards, it was an incomprehensible exchange. They had superior technology, better ships, and more experienced crews. How had they lost twice as many vessels to primitive mayflies? By human standards, it was an acceptable trade ratio. Admiral Fletcher received Rodriguez's after-action report with grim satisfaction. The swarm tactics had worked exactly as designed. The Valdori were learning that humans played by different rules. News of the victory at Kepler Station spread through human space at light speed. More importantly, it spread through Valdori space just as quickly. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Empire had suffered a military defeat. Other species under Valdori control began to whisper among themselves. Maybe these new arrivals were different. Maybe the crystal tyrants weren't invincible after all. Captain Rodriguez survived the battle, though her ship, Wasp, was so damaged it would never fly again. She stood in the observation deck of a rescue vessel, looking out at the debris field, where so many of her friends had died. "Was it worth it?" asked Lieutenant Torres, whose own ship had barely made it through the engagement. Rodriguez thought about Captain Bennett and his final transmission. She thought about the choice the Valdori had given humanity: serve or die. She thought about the future her species was fighting for. "Ask me again when we're standing on their homeworld," she said quietly. In the depths of Valdori space, Chancellor Mordain received reports of the defeat with growing alarm. The Mayflies had developed tactics that neutralized Valdori technological advantages. Worse, they had proven willing to accept casualty rates that no civilized species could sustain. For the first time in his 2,000-year life, Mordain began to understand that humanity might be more than just an annoying insect problem. They might actually be dangerous. The war had begun in earnest, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Fee. Escape pods looked like metallic seeds floating in the darkness of space. Admiral Tom Fletcher watched through the viewport of his flagship as human rescue ships collected survivors from another successful liberation operation. These weren't human survivors, though. They were Zephyrian refugees, bird-like beings whose homeworld had been freed from Valdori control just 3 days ago. A year had passed since the victory at Kepler Station, and the war had evolved in ways no one had predicted. What started as a simple conflict between humans and the Valdori Empire had become something much larger. Every species the Valdori had enslaved over the millennia was watching, waiting, and increasingly willing to fight back against their crystal overlords. Dr. Angela Reed materialized in the holographic briefing room, her image transmitted from the research station orbiting New Geneva. She looked older than her years, worn down by months of intensive weapons development, but her eyes still held the fire of someone who believed in humanity's cause. "Admiral, I have the results from our latest field tests," she announced, activating a display showing detailed scans of Valdori physiology. "The Harmony bombs are working better than we hoped. Their crystalline biology makes them incredibly vulnerable to specific sonic frequencies, but I think we can do better." Fletcher studied the data with interest. Human weapons technology had advanced more in the past year than in the previous decade, driven by the desperate need to find ways to hurt an enemy that was technologically superior in almost every way. "What are you thinking, Doctor?" Reed's smile was cold as winter on Pluto. "I'm thinking about targeted biological warfare. The Valdori aren't just crystal beings. They're living crystals with specific resonance patterns. If we can create a virus that attacks those patterns, we could potentially target their entire species." "A plague weapon," Fletcher said quietly. "Are you sure about this path, Doctor?" "They gave us the choice to serve or die, Admiral. They murdered our diplomats and threatened to exterminate our entire species. I stopped worrying about moral implications when they decided we were insects to be crushed." Before Fletcher could respond, his communications officer interrupted. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from Liberation Fleet 7. They're requesting immediate assistance." The holographic display switched to show Captain Elena Martinez, commanding the Liberation Fleet responsible for freeing enslaved populations in the Outer Rim territories. Her face was streaked with sweat, and her uniform was torn, suggesting she was transmitting from a combat situation. "Admiral, we've got a problem," Martinez reported. "The Valdori have started executing civilian populations before we can reach them. Entire planets are being sterilized rather than allowed to fall into human hands." Fletcher felt his jaw tighten. The Valdori were adapting to human tactics, but their response was typically brutal. Rather than improve their military capabilities, they were simply destroying anything they couldn't hold. "How many worlds?" he asked. "3 so far that we know of." "The Helix system, Corbin's world, and the entire Xerion colony chain. We're talking about billions of dead civilians, Admiral. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Fletcher looked around at his officers and saw the same cold fury in their eyes that he felt in his own chest. The Valdori weren't just fighting a war anymore. They were committing genocide to deny humanity the satisfaction of liberation victories. "Dr. Reed," Fletcher said quietly, "how quickly can you have that biological weapon ready for deployment?" "Give me 2 months and unlimited resources," Reed replied without hesitation. "You have both. Whatever you need, wherever you need it. The gloves are off." Meanwhile, in the depths of the former Valdori slave colonies, something unprecedented was happening. Species that had been enemies for centuries were working together under human coordination. The liberation fleets had become something more than military operations. They were becoming the foundation of a new galactic order. On Ai, the world of Kepler-7, recently freed from Valdori control, 3 different species worked side by side in newly constructed shipyards. The Zephyrians contributed their knowledge of Valdori weak points, gained through centuries of forced servitude. The mechanical Corbin shared their manufacturing expertise, allowing human designs to be produced more efficiently. The aquatic Nerids provided intelligence about Valdori supply routes gathered from their forced labor in the Empire's underwater mining operations. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim had been assigned as the human liaison to this unlikely alliance. She stood in the main assembly hall of the joint facility, watching as beings who had never cooperated before worked together with the focused intensity of people who had finally found hope. "It's remarkable," said Vel Corian, the Zephyrian engineer who served as the facility's technical coordinator. His feathers rustled with excitement as he spoke. "For 300 years, we tried to resist the Valdori individually. Every species fought alone and failed alone. But you humans, you don't just fight for yourselves." Kim nodded, watching as a group of Corbin technicians installed human-designed oscillation weapons into a Zephyrian fighter craft. "We learned early in our history that cooperation beats individual strength. We've had to work together just to survive on our own world." The Sayer. "Valdori never learned that lesson," rumbled Torx Mechanical 7, the Corbin production supervisor. His metallic voice carried undertones of satisfaction. "They ruled through fear and technological superiority for so long that they forgot how to adapt. But adaptation is survival, and survival is the highest logic." The results of this cooperation were already showing on the battlefield. Mixed species fleet formations were proving more effective than pure human forces. Zephyrian pilots, with their 3-dimensional flight instincts, could execute maneuvers that human pilots couldn't imagine. Corbin-manufactured vessels lasted longer in combat than human-built ships. Nerid intelligence networks provided advance, warning of Valdori military movements. But it was the psychological effect that mattered most. Across Valdori space, enslaved populations were beginning to believe that freedom was possible. Resistance movements that had been dormant for centuries were suddenly active again. The empire that had seemed eternal was showing cracks in its foundation. Chancellor Mordain called an emergency session of the Valdori High Council for the first time in 300 years. The crystalline chamber deep within Chrysos Prime resonated, with harmonic frequencies as the Empire's oldest and most powerful beings gathered to address the growing crisis. "The situation has become unacceptable," Mordain announced, his voice creating complex interference patterns in the crystal walls. "The mayfly species and their allies have disrupted the natural order throughout 17 sectors. Our subject races are rebelling on 43 worlds." Elder Thex Corvain, ancient even by Valdori standards, responded with harmonics so low they were felt rather than heard. "Perhaps it is time to negotiate. The humans seem willing to accept conditional surrender terms." The very suggestion caused discordant resonances throughout the chamber. Negotiate with mayflies? Accept terms from insects that lived less than a century? Impossible. declared General Vex Thulan, recently promoted after the disaster at Kepler Station. The Valdori Empire does not negotiate with temporary beings. We have ruled this galaxy for 10 millennia. We will rule it for 10 millennia more. Then what do you propose? Mordain asked. Total war, Thulan replied. We stop trying to preserve the infrastructure of rebellious worlds. We sterilize everything the humans have touched and rebuild from pure crystal. Let the galaxy see what happens to those who defy eternal order. The decision was reached through harmonic consensus, as all Valdori decisions had been for thousands of years. They would escalate the conflict rather than adapt to it. The Empire would demonstrate its power through destruction rather than innovation. It was exactly the response Admiral Fletcher had predicted. 3 weeks later, Dr. Reed transmitted her final report from the secure laboratory facility orbiting Titan. The crystal plague is ready for deployment, Admiral. It's engineered to target the specific harmonic frequencies that maintain Valdori's cellular structure. Once introduced into their communication networks, it will spread through their entire species within days. Fletcher stared at the small containment unit she had developed. It looked innocent enough, about the size of a coffee cup, but it contained enough engineered viral material to potentially wipe out every Valdori in the galaxy. Are you certain it won't affect other crystalline species? He asked. Completely certain. The virus is keyed specifically to Valdori bioharmonic signatures. It won't even affect their crystal technology, just their living tissue. Fletcher nodded. Slowly. The moral weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force. They were talking about genocide, the complete elimination of a sentient species. But then he remembered the reports from the sterilized worlds, the billions of civilians the Valdori had murdered rather than see them freed. How do we deploy it? Their communication network is their weakness, Reed explained. The Valdori use harmonic resonance to communicate across vast distances. It's elegant and efficient, but it means their entire species is essentially one big connected organism. Introduce the plague at any major communication hub, and it will spread everywhere they have presence. Do it, Fletcher ordered. And may whatever gods are watching forgive us all. Meanwhile, General Thulan was implementing his own final solution. The Valdori battle fleet, the largest military force the Empire had assembled in over 1,000 years, was moving toward human space with orders to sterilize every world humanity had ever touched. Standing in the command center of the massive dreadnought Eternal Supremacy, Thulan felt the satisfaction of someone who believed he was about to restore the natural order of the galaxy. 300 Valdori warships, each one a crystalline masterpiece of destruction, would demonstrate once and for all why the Empire had ruled unchallenged for 10 millennia. All vessels report ready for the final offensive, his aide reported. Estimated time to the human homeworld, 6 days. Excellent, Thulan replied. When we are finished, there will be nothing left of the mayfly species except crystallized carbon in empty space. The other races will remember this lesson for 1,000 generations. But as the Valdori fleet advanced toward Earth, humanity's own final gambit was already in motion. Captain Rodriguez, now commanding a specially modified stealth ship, approached. The Valdori communication relay at Nexus Point 7. The facility was lightly defended, considered too important to the Empire's infrastructure to be a military target. Approaching the relay station, Rodriguez reported to Admiral Fletcher. Valdori sensors haven't detected us yet. Remember, Captain, once you release that virus, there's no going back. We'll have crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. Rodriguez thought about all the friends she'd lost in the past year of fighting. She thought about the enslaved species who were finally seeing hope for the first time in centuries. She thought about the choice the Valdori had given humanity at the very beginning. Serve or die. Admiral, they made this choice when they decided we were insects, she said quietly. We're just showing them what happens when insects evolve. The stealth ship docked with the communication relay without triggering any alarms. Rodriguez and her small team infiltrated the facility, using equipment specifically designed to interface with Valdori crystal technology. The plague virus was introduced into the harmonic network through what appeared to be a routine maintenance update. Within hours, the infection began spreading through every Valdori communication system in the galaxy. It moved at the speed of their own thoughts, racing through crystal networks that connected every member of their species to their collective consciousness. The first symptoms appeared on the outer colonies. Valdori citizens began experiencing harmonic disruption, their crystalline bodies losing cohesion as the virus attacked the fundamental frequencies that held their molecular structure together. They didn't die violently. They simply began to fade, their crystal forms dissolving into dust as their harmonic signatures collapsed. General Thulin felt the first effects while his fleet was still 3 days from Earth. A discordant note in his harmonic consciousness, like a single instrument playing out of tune in an otherwise perfect symphony. He tried to ignore it, focusing on the upcoming battle, but the dissonance grew stronger with each passing hour. "General," his aide reported, harmonic voice carrying overtones of panic, "we're receiving reports of sickness from across the Empire. Citizens on 17 worlds are reporting harmonic disruption." Thulin's crystalline form resonated with frequencies of denial. "Impossible. The Valdori do not experience sickness. We are beings of perfect crystal. We do not decay." But even as he spoke, he could feel the wrongness spreading through his own body. The harmonic patterns that had maintained his physical form for over 3,000 years were becoming unstable. Other crew members were showing similar symptoms, their crystal bodies losing their inner light as the plague virus destroyed their cellular structure from within. "All ships, return to Chrysos Prime immediately," Thulin commanded, his voice now carrying discordant overtones of fear. "We must find a cure for this contamination." But there would be no cure. Dr. Reed had designed the crystal plague to be perfectly adapted to Valdori physiology. It was a weapon of extinction, created by a species that had been threatened with extinction themselves. As the mighty Valdori fleet turned away from Earth and raced desperately toward their homeworld, the plague continued its work. Communication networks that had carried harmonic thoughts for 10,000 years went silent one by one. Crystal cities that had stood since before human civilization began flickered and went dark. Admiral Fletcher stood on the observation deck of his flagship, watching the distant stars that marked Valdori space. Intelligence reports were already coming in about the plague's effects. The Valdori Empire, which had ruled a quarter of the known galaxy, was collapsing as its entire population succumbed to humanity's final weapon. "Second thoughts, Admiral?" asked Captain Martinez, who had joined him at the viewport. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, contemplating the magnitude of what they had done. They had committed genocide on a galactic scale, wiping out a species that was millions of years old. Future historians would debate whether it was justice or atrocity. "Ask me in 100 years," Fletcher said finally, "when we know what kind of galaxy we've created." The tide had turned, but the victory tasted like ashes in the mouths of those who had won it. Humanity had saved itself by becoming something it had never wanted to be, a species capable of exterminating another intelligent race. The Valdori Empire was dying, and humanity would have to live with the consequences of that death for generations to come. The crystal gardens of Chrysos Prime had grown silent. For 10,000 years, the harmonic frequencies of Valdori thoughts had created a symphony that resonated through every structure on their homeworld. Now, Chancellor Mordain stood alone in the grand resonance chamber, watching as the last members of his species faded into crystalline dust. The plague had reached the core worlds faster than anyone thought possible. Valdori communication networks, which had been their greatest strength, had become the delivery system for their own extinction. Every harmonic pulse that carried their thoughts also carried the virus that was destroying their cellular structure. Mordain felt his own body beginning to lose cohesion. His crystalline form, which had maintained perfect harmony for over 2,000 years, now produced discordant notes that hurt to hear. Around him, the magnificent spires of the capital city flickered and dimmed as the Valdori who had grown, them dissolved into nothing. A final transmission reached him from General Thulan's fleet, still racing desperately toward their homeworld. Chancellor, the contamination has spread to all ships. Our crews the harmony is breaking. The transmission ended in static. Mordain knew he would never hear another Valdori voice. In less than a week, humanity had accomplished what no enemy had managed in 10 millennia. They had destroyed the Empire not through superior technology or brilliant tactics, but through simple, ruthless efficiency. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Valdori had dismissed humans as mayflies, short-lived insects unworthy of consideration. But mayflies, when threatened, could become a swarm that devoured everything in their path. As his consciousness began to fade, Mordain composed a final message and broadcast it toward human space. It wasn't a surrender or a plea for mercy. It was a warning. To the species that calls itself human, his voice echoed through the dying crystal networks. You have proven that mayflies can indeed destroy mountains. But mountains endure through patience and time, while mayflies burn bright and brief. When you have become the rulers of this galaxy, remember what you did to achieve that rule. And remember that there are always other mayflies, other swarms, waiting for their chance to grow. The message faded as Mordain's harmonic signature collapsed entirely, leaving only a small pile of glittering dust where one of the galaxy's oldest beings had stood. Admiral Fletcher received the transmission aboard his flagship as the human fleet approached the Valdori core systems. The surrender he had expected never came. Instead, long-range sensors showed only silence where once the most powerful empire in known space had thrived. Dr. Reed joined him on the bridge via hologram, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who had worked for months without rest. Preliminary scans confirm it, Admiral. The plague worked exactly as designed. Valdori life signs have dropped to 0 across all monitored systems. All of them? Fletcher asked quietly. Every single one. The virus spread through their communication network faster than even I predicted. Their species-wide harmonic consciousness became their weakness. Within 72 hours of initial deployment, every Valdori in the galaxy was dead. The bridge fell silent. They had won the war, but the victory felt hollow. Somewhere in the back of Fletcher's mind, he wondered if this was how gods felt after destroying cities with floods or fire. The power to exterminate an entire species was not something humans were meant to possess. "What about their technology?" he asked. "Intact," Reed replied. "The virus only affected living tissue. Their crystal cities, their ships, their infrastructure, it's all still functional. We could potentially reverse engineer everything they built over 10,000 years." Captain Martinez, who had been studying the tactical displays, looked up with concern. "Admiral, we're detecting movement in the outer systems. Ships that aren't showing Valdori energy signatures." Fletcher activated the long-range sensors and saw what Martinez meant. Vessels from dozens of different species were converging on former Valdori territory. The Harani with their hive ships, the Corvash with their massive carriers, the Delini trading fleets, and dozens of others. Word of the Empire's destruction had spread quickly, and everyone wanted a piece of what the Valdori had left behind. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving transmission requests from 17 different fleets. They all want to discuss territorial claims." Fletcher realized that humanity had created a power vacuum that would reshape the entire galaxy. The Valdori Empire had controlled over 800 star systems, countless worlds, and resources, beyond imagination. Now all of that was up for grabs, and every spacefaring species was racing to claim their share. "Open a channel to all vessels," Fletcher ordered. "This is Admiral Fletcher of the Human Federation Fleet. I want to make something very clear to everyone listening." The bridge crew watched as their commander prepared to address what was essentially the entire galaxy. This would be humanity's first official statement as the species that had toppled the Valdori Empire. "The Valdori Empire has fallen," Fletcher announced, his voice carrying across dozens of star systems. "Their species chose extinction rather than coexistence, and we gave them what they wanted. But their territory, their resources, and their technology will not be divided among conquering fleets." Protests immediately flooded the communication channels. Dozens of species claimed ancient rights to former Valdori worlds, historical grievances that justified territorial expansion or simple rights of salvage. Fletcher let them argue for several minutes before continuing. "The former Valdori territories will be administered by the Liberation Council, consisting of all species that fought against the Empire. Every world will be governed by its original inhabitants, not by whoever has the biggest fleet in orbit." "And who gave humanity the authority to make such decisions?" demanded the voice of a Corvash war leader. Fletcher's smile was cold enough to freeze helium. "We gave ourselves that authority when we developed the weapon that ended the Valdori threat. Anyone who disagrees is welcome to test their fleets against the species that exterminated an empire in less than a week." The communication channels fell silent. The galaxy was learning a new reality. Humanity didn't just fight wars, they solved problems. And sometimes, entire species became problems that needed solving. Over the following months, the Liberation Council established a new galactic order based on principles that would have been alien to the Valdori. Instead of might making right, the new government was built on cooperation between equals. Every species, regardless of size or technological level, had representation in the council. Captain Rodriguez, now promoted to admiral, led the expedition that explored Chrysos Prime. Walking through the crystal cities where no Valdori would ever sing again, she felt the weight of what humanity had accomplished. The architecture was beautiful beyond description, but it was also a monument to arrogance and oppression. "It's like walking through a tomb," reported Dr. Harrison, the xenoarchaeologist assigned to catalog Valdori technology. "Everything is perfectly preserved, but it feels empty, dead." Rodriguez nodded, looking up at crystal spires that reached toward the stars. "That's exactly what it is. A tomb for an entire species. The question is whether we're the mourners or the grave diggers." In the years that followed, human space expanded rapidly as the Liberation Council distributed former Valdori territories among member species. Humanity received significant holdings, but not through conquest. They earned them through liberation, by freeing enslaved populations and helping them rebuild their civilizations. The Valdori crystal technology revolutionized human science, but it came with a cost. Every advance, every new discovery, was a reminder of the species they had destroyed to obtain it. Human children learned about the Valdori War in school, but the lessons focused on the price of victory rather than its glory. President Santos, now in her second term, dedicated the memorial to the fallen on Luna. It wasn't just for human casualties. The monument listed every sentient being who had died in the war, including the Valdori themselves. "We fought them because they threatened our existence," she said at the dedication ceremony. "We destroyed them because they chose extinction over coexistence, but we remember them because forgetting would make us the monsters they thought we were." The galaxy settled into an uneasy peace under the Liberation Council's guidance. Trade routes that had been controlled by Valdori overlords were open to all species. Technological advances were shared freely rather than hoarded by a single empire. For the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy was truly free. But freedom came with responsibility. Humanity found itself in the position the Valdori had once occupied, the dominant military power in known space. Other species looked to them for protection, for leadership, for solutions to problems that seemed impossible to solve. Admiral Fletcher, now approaching retirement, often stood in his office looking out at the stars. The view included the direction of Chrysos Prime, where crystal cities still gleamed in the light of an alien sun, beautiful and empty and silent. His aide, a young officer who had been born after the war ended, once asked him if he regretted the decision to use the crystal. Plague. Fletcher was quiet for a long time before answering. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the Valdori couldn't see beyond their own arrogance. I regret that billions of sentient beings died because their leaders preferred extinction to equality. But do you regret saving humanity? Never, Fletcher replied immediately. The Valdori made their choice when they decided we were insects to be crushed. We just showed them what happens when insects evolve. The galaxy had learned to fear and respect humanity in equal measure. They were the species that had ended the Valdori Empire, the mayflies who had proven that even mountains could be worn away by persistent erosion. But more importantly, they were the species that had built something better from the ashes of their enemies. The Liberation Council wasn't perfect, but it was fair. The new galactic order wasn't without conflict, but it was without slavery. And, in the end, perhaps that was the most human thing of all, not just the ability to destroy their enemies, but the wisdom to build something better from the wreckage of war. The Valdori existed now only in history books and crystal monuments, a reminder to future generations that empires built on oppression always eventually crumble. Their killers had become the galaxy's gardeners, cultivating freedom where once there had been only tyranny. It was not the ending anyone had expected when Captain Bennett first shook hands with Chancellor Mordain. But it was the ending that a species called humanity had chosen to write. One decisive action at a time.